Hi, guys. Okay, so you are supposed to finish annotating fish cheeks. If you were in period 4A, you were able to annotate all the choices, all the consequences, and all the impacts of our character deciding that she was going to be embarrassed by her culture. Many of you were even able to get a figurative language, so good for you. If you're in period 6A, you were able to do the same thing with choice, consequences, and impact. So you highlighted all of the examples that did that. If you're in period 7A, you were able to highlight many of the choices. I think you got almost all of them. However, you still need to work on consequences and impact. And if you were in 3A, you barely got started. So 3A and 7A, you've got some work to do. So if you're in 6A or 4A, you can skip over to part of the presentation where I go over elements of literature. And the elements of literature that we're going to be focusing on are point of view, mood, and conflict. So you can skip over to the graphic organizer, the Cornell graphic organizer, and work with me on that. However, if you're in 7A or 3A, let's talk. All right. So we read the story, Fish Cheeks, and what we decided was the main character was embarrassed of her culture. And she got really freaked out when her parents invited her love interest and his family, who are white, over for dinner, right? So she became super embarrassed. And it was obvious through many of her choices, right? So let's see. For instance, you highlighted, so we're going to highlight choices. And remember, you all have a hard copy of this, so you should be working on the hard copy. Do not send me a digital copy of this. It's a hard copy you should be working on. I'm going to highlight, let's see, pink. My choice is pink. I'm going to highlight my consequences blue. And I'm going to highlight the impacts orange. Okay, so there we go. Choices, consequences, and impact. Okay, so 6A, 4A people. A lot of you decided that you wanted to highlight this section as a choice. So she chose to feel embarrassed about her shabby Chinese Christmas, right? Her noisy Chinese relatives, the Chinese food, right? And you can tell by the author's choice to italicize the Chinese 3 times that that kind of shows a tone and an attitude towards all of those elements. So we highlighted that as a choice. We also highlighted, depending on which class you were in, and if you haven't highlighted, then you're highlighting it now. We also decided dinner threw me into a deeper despair, right? She chooses to be in this despair. She chooses to decide that she's not going to enjoy her dinner or her love interest because she's so embarrassed. Again, I wanted to disappear. There is another area where she makes a decision how she's going to act and how she's going to show that she is embarrassed. She was also stunned into silence for the night, right? Because again, she was so embarrassed by the burping of her dad. Okay, so you may have some other choices highlighted, and that is great. Those are some of the major choices. Let's move on to consequences. So the consequences are what happened because of her choices. All right, so let's see here. A major consequence is that she ruins her evening, right? She ruins her evening. So we can go down here where it says, after everyone had gone, my mother said to me, "You want to be the same as an American girl on the outside?" She handed me an early gift. It was a mini skirt and beige tweed. But inside, you must always be Chinese. You must be proud you are different. Your only shame is to have shame. Okay, so a consequence here is that she feels shame. So we can highlight that. I chose to use blue. Highlight that in blue. Right? Now, you might find other consequences of her choices, and you can highlight those as well. Some people think I was stunned into silence for the rest of the night is a consequence, right? A consequence of her actions of feeling embarrassed by her family. So if you want to highlight that as a consequence, you're welcome to do that. I wanted to disappear as a consequence of what happened at the dinner table, like her choice again to be embarrassed by her family. You're welcome to do that as well. So some of these may, for you, be a consequence of some of the choices, and that's perfectly fine as well. And then finally, there's the impact, right? And the impact is from all of her choices, right? And all of those consequences. So we have this last paragraph definitely being a paragraph that has an impact. So we're doing that orange. And that paragraph says, and though I didn't agree with her then, I knew that she understood how much I had suffered during the evening's dinner. It wasn't until many years later, long after I had gotten over my crush on Robert, that I was able to fully appreciate her lesson and the true purpose behind a particular menu. For Christmas Eve that year, she had chosen all my favorite foods. Okay, so it impacts her to realize that her mom was right. So I may also make a little note here so that I understand why I did that in all orange. So I might say, she realizes that her mom was right, right? And when we say was right in that her only shame was to have shame, right? And so that is even the theme as well, right? That is the moral or the lesson that the author is trying to tell us. So she realizes that her mom was right, that shame, only shame is to have shame. You can be making little notations like that on your document as well. All right. So if you want to go through and you want to add more choices and more consequences, you are welcome to do that. Right. And when you're focusing on her choice to be embarrassed and what are those consequences of her choice, you feel embarrassed. Right. She ruins the evening for her family. Right. She ruins the evening for herself. Now, when I say her family, I mean this one right here, I might make a little note, right? Consequences like, her mom understands that she's a teenager and that she might feel this way. But, also when we hurt our parents, sometimes they understand why we're doing that because we're silly adolescents at times. But they understand how we feel, but it still hurts them. So we can say a consequence of this is kind of like hurting your mom a little bit. Right, and my point in this is just that you may go back and see like, "Oh, there are other areas where I can tell that it's a consequence of her choice," or here's an impact of the consequences. Okay, so once you do that, you're also welcome to go through and maybe highlight figurative language, and not all the classes got to do this, so if you do that, it'd be a bonus, right? Right, I might highlight that in yellow. I see as white as Mary in the manger. I see that as being figurative language, and that could fit into 2 different categories. Can you see which categories it might be? I see a little bit of personification here. What is being personified? I see figurative language there. What kind of figurative language is that? So see if you can figure out what kind of figurative language it is and mark that on your paper. Write yourself a little note. All right. From there, you need to work on your Cornell notes. So I know you're doing Cornell notes in history. And so remember, Cornell notes are a way for you to interact with the information that you're learning. So on one side, you write the question. I've already provided the question for you. And then on the right side, you might write definitions, you might write little notes, you might write examples, you might write sentences. Usually what goes on the right-hand side is going to be brief and to the point and help you understand the information. All right, so first of all, inciting incident. So when I think of insight, it's not INSIGHT like insight, like, oh, I have some insight on that. No, insight means, if you look it up, it means that there is something being provoked or that there is something being spurred, maybe something to spur on, right? Or you can think of, one second. Thank you. All right, maybe something to move into action. Something moves something into action would be to incite an incident, or maybe stirred up, or urged on, urge on, right? Those are some things that also mean inciting incident. So in our story, what is the inciting incident? When you think about it, what causes our main character to make all these choices that she did and to have all these consequences and then to have impacts of all these consequences? So think about that. What happens in the beginning of the story, the incident that causes the conflict? That's how you have to think about it. The incident that causes the conflict. I would say that Robert is coming to dinner, right? This causes her fear and anxiety and to be embarrassed. So that definitely causes our conflict. All right, conflict. Conflict comes in many forms. First of all, it's external or internal. What is our character having? Is she having internal conflicts or external conflicts? If you said internal, you are correct, right? And some of those internal conflicts can be human versus self. She's definitely having a human versus self conflict, right? This internal conflict, this being embarrassed about her culture. There can be human versus human, right? Externally fighting arguments. There could be human versus society, right? When a human or a group of people are against something in society, it could be laws, could be policies. We have human versus fate, like destiny. For instance, we have our destiny to die. We can't stop that, right? So that's human versus fate, something that's inevitable. And we also have human versus nature, right? So you can think of nature, elements of nature. So right now we're dealing with smoke from wildfires. That's human versus nature. We're dealing with COVID, right? COVID is a single cell organism, I believe, right? Viruses, you're learning about that in history or in science. So those could be nature. All right. So our inciting incident, Robert is coming to dinner, causes our conflict, right? I would like you to show me examples of her internal struggle, Amy's internal struggle, of human versus self. I would like you to find me an example, quote it correctly, and cite it. And when you're citing it with the parenthetical, you can use Tan, that is the author's last name, and then you could use a paragraph number. So when she says, here's an example, like when I found out, I'm going to use an ellipses because I don't need all of it. I cried. Right? So when she found out Robert was coming to dinner, she cried. All right. So we do not put a period there, even though it's the end of the sentence when we're doing a parenthetical. So then we do the author's last name, and then we do, if we have page numbers, we do page numbers. If we don't, we could do paragraphs. So it came from paragraph 2, and then we put the period outside, and you can't forget your parentheses at the end of your quotation. All right, so this is called textual evidence, and I'm quoting it and I'm citing it. This is a parenthetical citation because it has parentheses around it. Okay, and I would like you to do 1. So you have to look at the text to find the example. So quote it and cite it just like I did. Okay, moving on to mood. All right, so mood. What is mood? So basically, mood is a literary element that evokes, and evokes, the E in evokes means to bring out or bring forth, outside, like exit, feelings and senses through words and descriptions. Okay, sometimes that mood can come in through like the setting. Basically, think back to like when you read a book or you saw a movie and you get this like feeling of like tension or anxiety when you know the characters are going to do something stupid and you're just like, stop, don't do that, right? You get very anxious for them. You get tense, right? That tension, that anxiety is built up through, if it's in writing, it's the author's use of words, use of choice of diction, how it's said, what the characters do. It could be through the setting. So that is the mood. So what is the mood in Fish Cheeks? Like how do you feel when you read it? Right? And I think the author's really good about making us feel a certain way through her choice of diction, so the words she chooses and how her character acts, some of her sentence structure, some of her descriptions, like even just italicizing the word Chinese in that second paragraph really gives us a certain that attitude towards her Chinese heritage kind of creates a mood for us. And I kind of feel like it's this uncomfortableness. All right. So I would like you to give me evidence where like the author is showing us that feeling of uncomfortableness or that mood. And I would like you to cite it and quote it correctly. Okay, moving on to first person narrator, or actually narrator in general. So we have 3 different types of point of view. So if I ever put POV on your paper, I'm talking about point of view. So we have first person, we have second person, and then we have third person. Okay, and third person has 3 different types of third person. Okay, so first of all, with first person narrator, right, we see the narrator is a character in the story, and the character is using I and we, and you have to look outside of the dialogue. You never look in the dialogue, like character dialogue, to see point of view. Always look at outside of the narrator's writing. So it's usually a character in the story. Characters in the story. And basically, we get a sense of how the character interacts with other people from the narrator's perspective. So, through the narrator's perspective. Okay, so a lot of you probably read stories in first person point of view with your independent reading books. Second person point of view is very rare. That is when you is used, and it's almost like you become a character in the story. So there are those choose your own adventure stories, And that would definitely be a good example, but there aren't many of those. It would be something like you walked into the classroom and then you sat down and then you pulled out a big sandwich and then you ate it and then you belched really loudly and got heartburn, right? No, you don't read a lot of stories like that. Third person, I bet you read a lot of third person stories as well. And basically, third person is not a figure in the story. I like to see it as like from a bird's eye view. Right? Basically, it's this outside entity that's an observer that's telling you, describing to you what has happened. So, third person limited, this is basically when you've got the narrator on the outside. Whoops, didn't want to do that. The narrator on the outside of the story, right? Bird's eye view, can give you the mind of one character, right? Give you the thoughts and feelings of one character. Third objective is very different. So this is when you've got that outside observer, but the outside observer can only report what he or she sees and hears. So does not know the characters or any of the characters' thoughts or feelings. Only can report on what he or she sees and hears. And lastly, third person omniscient. So third person omniscient is all knowing. Can you think of any words that you know with omni in it? Omnipotent, all powerful. How about omnivore? You might be an omnivore, right? You eat meat and vegetables, omnivore. Okay, so this narrator is all knowing outsider, can see into the minds and know what all the characters are doing. So it seems like authors these days are being really creative with their point of view. So you might have like first person point of view, but it's alternating first person point of view from different chapters. You might have third person point of view, and maybe it's limited to one character per chapter. So you see a lot of creative point of view these days. Okay, so I would like you to find examples of our fish cheeks point of view, right? So I'm going to tell you that it's first person. It's first person point of view, and I would like you to find me a quote that shows the first person point of view, and I would like you to quote it and cite it correctly. So find me textual evidence that shows first person point of view and cite it correctly and quote it correctly. Okay, so hopefully this lesson helped you out a little bit. All righty, and you will be turning this in. Okay, bye.